What if everything you think you know about human history is not just wrong, but a deliberate lie spanning 13 million years? Look around you. You're told civilization began maybe 6,000 years ago in Sumer, right? But the deepest secrets of our past don't lie in fragile clay tablets or dusty Egyptian tombs. They are buried under millions of years of rock, sealed by a cataclysmic event so devastating it wiped the slate clean, not just once, but multiple times. We're not talking about the Younger Dryas or the Great Flood. We're going back far, far further to an epoch where giants walked the earth, where intergalactic politics determined the fate of our DNA, and where a single audacious king brought global civilization to its knees. This isn't mythology. This is the truth hidden in plain sight, encoded in the most ancient records known to mankind, the Sumerian king lists. Mainstream archaeology glances at these texts and snorts, pointing to the impossibly long reigns. Thousands, sometimes millions of years for a single ruler. They dismiss it as religious fantasy. But what if those outrageous numbers aren't mistakes? What if those millions of years represent a genuine, terrifying timeline, detailing the rule of the very first celestial beings on Earth? We're talking about the Anunnaki, the beings who descended from Nibiru, whose primary mission on this planet was never benevolent but purely self-serving, the quest for gold, the metal they needed to repair their homeworld's atmosphere. But even within this powerful celestial lineage, there was a fatal fracture, a forgotten history of rebellion and usurpation that dictates the shadow government running the world today. Before the famous struggle between the brothers Enki and Enlil, the very foundation of our religious and political strife, there was another, earlier king, a ruler so powerful, so dangerous, that his existence had to be meticulously scrubbed from the historical record, his name whispered only in the deepest, darkest corners of occult lore. This is the story of the lost Anunnaki king, the original usurper, Enlil. His exile to Earth wasn't just a simple banishment. It was the ultimate power play that introduced high planetary stakes to our unassuming blue marble. Enlil arrived here not as a settler, but as a claimant to the Anunnaki throne, bringing with him a secret weapon, a technology of mass destruction that threatened to annihilate both Earth and his own people. His reign, though short in the grand scheme, triggered the Psalm 13,000-year doom, the geological and genetic time bomb that fundamentally altered the course of all life. We are talking about a pre-flood civilization so advanced that its remnants are now mistaken for mere natural formations. Cities buried, infrastructure turned to dust, a global history completely rewritten by the victors. Why did they cover it up? Because the return of the true heir, the bloodline of the lost king, is the greatest threat to the current system of control. Stick with us, because we are about to decode the ancient cipher and unearth the terrifying evidence of this 13-million-year conspiracy. You need to understand the catastrophic event that wiped out this earliest era, because the geological scars are still visible, and the clock might be ticking again. Now, before we plunge into the evidence of the geological doom, the actual planetary scars left by Enlil's power play, I need to ask you something crucial. If this hidden history, this massive conspiracy spanning millions of years, truly exists, doesn't it fundamentally change how you view your place in the universe? If the ruling powers, celestial or otherwise, have spent eons purging the record of this lost Anunnaki king, it means this knowledge is the key to unlocking our own origins. So, if you're ready to pull back the curtain on this 13-million-year deception, hit that like button right now. Seriously, smash the like. Because every single engagement helps this vital, suppressed history bypass the algorithms that are designed to keep uncomfortable truths hidden. And please subscribe and turn on notifications, because you won't want to miss how the bloodline of Enlil managed to survive and influence the modern world. Most importantly, I want to hear your initial thoughts. Have you ever questioned the bizarre timelines in the Sumerian king lists? Do you believe the evidence of a global cataclysm far older than 10,000 years is real? Drop your deepest theories and questions in the comments below. Let's start the investigation together. We left off questioning the very fabric of accepted history, focusing on that terrifying number, 13 million years. Think about the audacity of that claim. Conventional history, the one taught in schools, the one sanctioned by the archaeological cabal, insists on a comfortable, manageable time frame. Everything we know has to fit neatly into the last 6,000 or 7,000 years. But the moment you seriously interrogate the Sumerian king lists, that entire structure collapses like a house of cards. When the ancient scribes record that the kings who ruled before the flood reigned for hundreds of thousands or even millions of years, they are not engaged in poetic license. They are detailing the chronology of non-human sovereigns, the Anunnaki, whose lifespans and temporal scales dwarfed anything we can comprehend. That 13 million year figure isn't just a random anomaly. It is the fingerprint of a profound, catastrophic reset, the geological doom that buried our origins. This wasn't just a flood that covered the plains of Mesopotamia. This was an event of planetary obliteration, orchestrated either by conflict or cosmic mechanics, that ensured virtually zero trace of the earliest Anunnaki infrastructure would survive intact for us to find today. Imagine a civilization far surpassing ours, built not with concrete and steel, but with technologies utilizing anti-gravity and zero-point energy, suddenly subjected to forces equivalent to a planetary crustal displacement or a near-miss impact from Nibiru itself. We are looking for stone temples when we should be looking for vitrified ruins deep within continental shelves. This timescale immediately confronts the greatest lie of human origin, that we are the first or only intelligent species to dominate this planet. The Anunnaki arrived to mine gold, yes, but their presence established an entire pre-human civilization, complete with advanced cities, spaceports, and an established political hierarchy. When they record reigns of 43,000 years for a single king, they are measuring time by their own cycles, the orbital period of their homeworld, Nibiru. But then we hit the million-year problem. Why did the king lists suddenly jump to these truly unthinkable numbers, far surpassing even the Anunnaki's extended lifespans? This escalation points directly to the reign of the individual whose very existence threatened the core mission and led to the ultimate purge, the lost Anunnaki king. This king, whose name was violently expunged, represents the original faction of dissent. He challenged the supremacy of the ruling triumvirate, Anu, Enlil, and eventually Enki. His rebellion didn't just cause a political spat, it brought intergalactic warfare to Earth. The 13 million year timeline hints at the time required for Earth to fully recover, geologically and ecologically, from the initial impact of his rebellion. We are looking at a history broken not just by the waters of the Great Flood, but by epochs of genetic and environmental manipulation designed to stabilize a broken planet. This deep-time history is a massive cover-up, an engineered ignorance perpetuated by the descendants of the Anunnaki victors. If you study the geological record, you will find layers that seem inexplicable to uniformitarian science, sudden shifts in magnetic poles, rapid cooling events that make the younger Dryas look like a mild winter, and layers of metallic trace elements like iridium that suggest catastrophic impacts far earlier than the dinosaur extinction. These anomalies are the silent scars of the 13,000 year doom. They are the physical proof that a highly advanced civilization was not only here, but was violently removed, ensuring that our subsequent, carefully managed history would never dare to look that far back. It was easier for the subsequent Anunnaki rulers to simply wipe the slate clean, restart the human genetic experiment, and teach the survivors a brand new, sanitized version of history. But the conspirators missed one thing. The name and lineage of the lost king were so intrinsically tied to the initial infrastructure of Earth that completely erasing him proved impossible. His existence is hinted at in the gaps between the legitimate reigns, in the sudden shift from astronomical to merely ancient numbers in the king lists. He is the ghost in the machine of history. This systematic scrubbing was necessary because the bloodline he represented carried a claim to the throne of Nibiru itself, a claim that threatened the legitimacy of every ruler who came after him. To maintain control, they had to instill what amounts to cosmic amnesia in humanity. We are designed to forget what happened 13 million years ago. Understanding this terrifying timeline is the first step in decoding the complete narrative. It proves that the control mechanism, the cabal that governs information, is far older and more powerful than any secret society you can name today. This is the ultimate suppressed history. We must shift our focus from searching for artifacts that are thousands of years old to recognizing the massive geological movements and shifts that are millions of years old as the true burial ground of the first Anunnaki regime. What if the king lists only started recording reasonable timelines after the victors had successfully buried all evidence of their predecessor? This introduces us directly to the most dangerous and forgotten figure in the Sumerian saga. If you find the concept of a 13-million-year planetary cover-up compelling, type the phrase, eternal exile, in the comments right now to signal that you are ready to dig deeper. Because our next step is to uncover the specific lineage they tried to erase and understand why his name, above all others, was deemed too dangerous to remember. We've established the horrific scale of the 13-million-year doom, a cataclysm designed to erase the first epoch of Anunnaki rule. But for the conspiracy to be effective, they didn't just need to erase the cities and the timeline. They needed to erase the ruler himself. This brings us to the core of the mystery, the forgotten lineage, the king whose existence was erased from every tablet. Who was this man, or rather this entity, powerful enough to provoke a planetary-level erasure? The established narrative, the one we are fed through translated texts like Sitchin's works and scholarly analyses, focuses on the rivalry between Enlil and Enki, the two sons of Anu, the supreme ruler of Nibiru. This is the soap opera we are allowed to see. But the Anunnaki chronology is built upon a system of primogeniture, a specific line of succession where the right to rule passes through a particular bloodline. Before Enlil and Enki could even start their bitter feud over control of the Edenesian Earth, there was another figure, older and more legitimate in terms of Nibiruan succession laws, who stood in the way. This figure is the grandfather of the conflict, Alalu. His name is sometimes referenced fleetingly in the context of the initial arrival on Earth, but the narrative is always rushed, almost apologetic, as if the ancient scribes were hurrying past the most dangerous section of their own history. Alalu was not merely a troublesome relative, he was the legitimate king of Nibiru who was forcibly deposed by Anu. This deposition was the genesis of the entire Earth mission. When Anu staged his coup, Alalu fled. But he didn't flee into obscurity. He fled to the one place that held the key to the survival of Nibiru, Earth, the planet rich in gold. Alalu's audacity was staggering. He landed on Earth, established the initial gold mining operations, and effectively held Nibiru hostage. He sent a message back to Anu. I have your survival metal. You may depose me on Nibiru, but I will reign here on the Abzu, southern Africa, and if you dare challenge me, I will destroy the mines. He claimed Earth as his domain, establishing a lineage and rule that predates the arrival of the main Nibiruan expedition led by Enlil and Enki. This brief, terrifying and suppressed reign constitutes the true first dynasty of Earth, a dynasty the later Anunnaki regime desperately needed to annul. Why was his lineage so profoundly threatening? Because Alalu's bloodline carried the unblemished, legitimate right to the throne of Nibiru. By successfully establishing himself on Earth, he created a parallel power structure. When Anu sent his sons, Enki, to manage the mining, and Enlil, to manage the military, their first and unwritten directive was not just to manage the gold supply, but to neutralize the deposed king and his growing influence. The rivalry between Enki and Enlil, which later defined human religion and politics, was simply the aftermath of the much larger primal conflict initiated by Alalu. The erasure wasn't just physical, it was chronological and genealogical. By collapsing the timeline, by insisting that the reigns before the flood were impossibly long and therefore mythological, they successfully discredited Alalu's legitimate claim. The victors painted him as a rogue, a villain, a footnote. But if you analyze the gaps, the textual inconsistencies, and the sudden violent transitions in the oldest Sumerian texts, the shadow of the lost king remains. His was the first civilization on Earth, established before the Eegigi, worker class, Anunnaki, were even fully deployed, and before the ultimate genetic experiment that created Homo sapiens. This is why understanding the forgotten lineage is paramount. It proves that the control structure imposed upon Earth isn't merely about mining gold, it's about maintaining a false political legitimacy established through a bloody, ancient coup. Every conflict on Earth, from the wars of religion to the structure of global finance, is an echo of the original struggle between the usurpers, Anu's line, and the legitimate Alalu's line. We need to acknowledge that history is written by the survivors, and in this case, the survivors had the power to literally shift the planetary axis and trigger millions of years of recovery just to solidify their claim. That is the definition of absolute, terrifying power. The next time you look at a history book, remember this. The most dangerous truth is not what's written, but what was so threatening that it had to be buried beneath the weight of molten 13,000-year doom. Now, if you think Alalu's rebellion is the missing key to understanding why our history feels so incomplete, tell me this. What do you believe was the real secret weapon Alalu brought to Earth that scared Anu so much? Was it a technology, a blood secret, or something else entirely? Let me know your best theories in the comments. Use the phrase, Alalu's secret, so I know you're tracking with this suppressed narrative. We have tracked the shadow of the blood, lost Anunnaki king, Alalu, a figure whose very existence was so combustible that his usurpers felt compelled to erase 13 million years of planetary history just to cover their tracks. But to truly grasp the scale of this ancient conspiracy, we need to take a step back and define the players. We need to solidify the Anunnaki introduction. Who were they, and why did they come to Earth? Forget the sanitized, watered-down definitions you might have heard. This is about power, genetics, and absolute dominion. The term Anunnaki literally translates from Sumerian as those who from heaven to earth came. They were not angels, gods, or spiritual beings in the traditional sense. They were highly advanced, genetically distinct physical beings, hominids perhaps, but on a scale of evolution far exceeding anything Earth had produced. Their homeworld, Nibiru, described in ancient texts as the 12th planet, operates on a massive elliptical orbit that brings it into our inner solar system only once every 3,600 Earth years, the period known as the Sar. This orbital cycle is central to their mythology and, crucially, their need for Earth. The core reason for their arrival was simple: survival. Nibiru was facing an atmospheric crisis. As the planet traveled through space, its atmosphere was degrading, and their solution was to use fine gold particles suspended in the upper atmosphere to repair the damage. Earth, as fate would have it, was exceptionally rich in gold, particularly in the deep veins of the Abzu Andi, or southern Africa. This was not a colonization mission driven by curiosity. It was a desperate, resource-driven invasion. When the main contingent, led by the aforementioned Anu, Enlil, and Enki, finally arrived following Alalu's initial rogue landing, they established a highly rigid military-industrial hierarchy. This was a sophisticated operation. They built Idin, the Garden of Eden, essentially their headquarters in Mesopotamia, established spaceports and designed an intricate logistical network. The first generation of Anunnaki workers, the Igigi, were the ones initially tasked with the backbreaking labor of gold mining. However, the Anunnaki themselves were creatures of enormous longevity, immense physical stature, and complex genetic makeup. Living under the gravitational and atmospheric conditions of Nibiru gave them their extended lifespans, those thousands of years' reigns recorded in the king lists. But Earth's environment, combined with the brutal mining labor, quickly led to discontent and mutiny among the Igigi. This labor revolt is one of the pivotal events in human history, often glossed over, but it highlights the Anunnaki's fundamental nature. They were demanding rulers who viewed Earth and its resources, including emerging life forms, as entirely subservient to Nibiruan needs. Their immense power was derived from their advanced technology, often mistaken for magic or divine miracles by early man. They possessed technologies for genetic manipulation, long-distance space travel, control over weather and geological forces, and, most importantly, the ability to rapidly accelerate or decelerate biological evolution. These were the gods who shaped the valleys, moved the mountains, and critically initiated the great genetic rewrite that would eventually produce Homo sapiens, a subject we will delve into later. But here is where the story connects back to Alalu and the 13 million year doom. The established Anunnaki narrative insists that they created order on Earth. But Alalu's brief, suppressed rule proves that there was an earlier order, one based on his legitimate, non-usurped claim to the throne. When Anu's faction arrived, they were not settling virgin territory. They were imposing a new regime over the remnants of Alalu's short-lived empire, an empire that, according to the deep chronological evidence, was wiped out by the very weapons Alalu either controlled or forced the Nibiruan military to deploy against him. Understanding the Anunnaki as desperate, technologically superior overlords is key to seeing the cover-up for what it is. Their motivation for erasing Alalu and the 13 million years isn't just political. It's about controlling the narrative of divine right. If humanity knew their gods were just highly flawed, feuding aliens obsessed with gold and power, the entire foundation of their control mechanism collapses. They needed to present themselves as immortal, unified, and divinely sanctioned, which they absolutely were not. Think of them as the ultimate deep state, operating not for years or decades, but across astronomical cycles. This is the truth that binds everything together. If this deeper understanding of the Anunnaki as ruthless celestial engineers resonates with you, I want you to comment with the phrase, celestial overlords. Let me know. Do you think the Anunnaki are still operating behind the scenes, pulling the strings of modern global politics? We've introduced the Anunnaki as the celestial overlords and established their resource-driven motivation, the critical need for gold, to save Nibiru. Now we must dive into the most vital piece of archaeological evidence we possess, the very texts that simultaneously prove their existence and hint at the massive cover-up. Decoding the Sumerian cipher, the king lists, and the problematic gaps. This is where the conspiracy shifts from theory to verifiable, albeit highly controversial, textual analysis. The Sumerian king lists are a cornerstone of ancient Mesopotamian history. They were compiled by scribes long after the Anunnaki had supposedly left, yet they detail the sequence of rulers when the kingship descended from heaven. Crucially, they divide history into two distinct epochs: those who ruled before the Great Flood, antediluvian period, and those who ruled after it. It is the antediluvian section that triggers immediate skepticism, and for us, profound illumination regarding the 30-million-year doom. In the first section, the reigns of the 8 or 10 kings listed, depending on the version of the tablets, are astronomically long. We are talking reigns of 28,800 years, 36,000 years, or even longer. As we touched upon earlier, these long durations are explained by the Anunnaki's extended lifespans relative to Nibiru's Saran cycle. However, these lists contain chronological inconsistencies, and more importantly, they omit critical information that the scribes, who were loyal to the post-flood regime, chose to ignore. The greatest problem with the lists isn't just the length of the reigns, it's the structure. Why do they begin with kings whose rule is stated in Sar cycles, and then abruptly transition to rulers whose reigns are measured in decades or centuries post-flood, suggesting a drastic change in longevity or an entirely different species taking over? This discontinuity is the smoking gun of the suppression. The gap represents the forced historical break, the moment when the victors successfully purged the record of the earlier, far more ancient history tied to the lost Anunnaki king, Alalu. Scholars typically try to normalize these figures, arguing they are mythologized representations of long-standing dynasties or numerical errors. But if we accept them as literal records of Nibiruan time, we unlock a timeline that stretches far beyond the conventional 450,000 years often cited for the start of the gold mission. The existence of the 13,000-year doom is subtly encoded in the impossibility of some of the earliest numbers, suggesting that the scribes were recording fragments of data from a time when planetary alignment and geological recovery cycles, not just individual reigns, defined the passage of history. Moreover, if you compare the king lists with other fragmented texts, particularly those dealing with the Igigi rebellion and the establishment of the first settlements, you find periods of intense conflict and political instability that simply do not align with the clean sequential reigns listed in the canonical tablets. These gaps and inconsistencies are the whisper of Alalu's failed yet devastating regime. His presence, his challenge to Anu, and the subsequent battle for Earth's resources were the catalyst for the geological reset. The official list had to be edited to remove any mention of this initial power struggle, portraying the Anunnaki arrival as a unified, orderly descent of gods, rather than a chaotic flight and counter-invasion. To maintain the illusion of seamless succession, the compilers of the king lists had to create a narrative where the current rulers, Enlil's and Enki's descendants, were the original and legitimate authority figures on Earth. They are trying to hide the fact that their dynasty was founded on a violent usurpation, not just of Anu on Nibiru, but of Alalu on Earth. The post-flood world was their chance to start fresh, establishing a history where they were the sole creators and custodians of humanity. Decoding this cipher means reading the silence. It means recognizing that the missing millions of years are not empty space, but the duration of the planet's trauma after the initial Nibiruan intervention, a trauma directly linked to the consequences of Alalu's exile and the weapon he brought with him. This hidden chronology is the key to understanding the deep roots of control. If you agree that these king lists are deliberate historical revisions designed to hide a cataclysmic war, type "Cipher solved" in the comments. We are about to look closer at the true, darker motivation for the entire gold mining mission, and it goes far beyond just fixing an atmosphere. What do you think is the biggest lie perpetuated by the gaps in the king lists? We've spent enough time decoding the chronology and identifying the political structure. Now it's time to confront the true, unsettling motivation behind the Anunnaki presence, moving beyond the simple atmospheric repair narrative. Nefarious intentions, the true, darker reason for the gold mining mission. If you think they crossed the void of space purely to save their own planet, you've only scratched the surface of this massive celestial conspiracy. The gold was necessary, yes, but the Earth mission served a secondary, far more sinister purpose related to intergalactic politics and the maintenance of their own tyrannical rule. The problem for Anu and the ruling council on Nibiru was not just a failing atmosphere, it was a failing political structure. The population was restless, resources were scarce, and the threat of internal rebellion, epitomized by the successful coup by Alalu, however brief his reign, was constant. To secure his own position and quell rising dissent, Anu needed two things: massive, unquestionable wealth and a viable, expendable workforce for hazardous duty. This is where Earth and its gold became more than just a repair mechanism. The gold was the ultimate currency, a metal so potent it could stabilize their planet, but also so valuable it could buy loyalty and finance military expansion across their local star system. The desperate need for gold created the perfect isolated environment to send away potential political threats. The Igigi, the lower-tier Anunnaki, who eventually mutinied, were not merely workers. Many were likely political exiles, or the descendants of factions loyal to Alalu, subtly sent to Earth under the guise of duty. Their placement on Earth served to distance them from the political heart of Nibiru, effectively neutralizing their ability to organize a large-scale revolt against Anu. But the most insidious reason connects directly back to the lost Anunnaki king. Alalu was deposed, but his claim, his bloodline's right to the throne, remained a threat. The Earth mission became a strategic military outpost, a way for Anu's sons, Enlil and Enki, to secure the planet before Alalu could establish an unassailable power base and use Earth's resources to launch a counter-coup against Nibiru. Thus, the gold mission was wrapped up in an ongoing civil war. The presence of sophisticated military technology and the rapid deployment of forces, as referenced in the accounts of the founding of their cities and spaceports, proves this wasn't just a mining operation. It was a military occupation designed to contain the existential threat posed by Alalu. This dark motivation also explains the chilling genetic experiments that followed. When the Igigi revolted, Enki proposed creating a new worker race, Homo sapiens, or the Adamu. Why go through the immense effort of genetic engineering when they could have simply brought more of their own kind from Nibiru? Because the purpose of humanity was not just to dig gold, it was to create a perfectly subservient, genetically manipulated slave race whose very DNA was designed to accept authority and forget its true origins. This controlled, short-lived, easily manageable labor force was the ideal replacement for the politically volatile Igigi. The whole enterprise became a testing ground for genetic and social control. Humanity was built to be easily reset, easily manipulated, and incapable of accessing the technological and historical truths that defined their creators. This systemic repression and genetic tampering were the ultimate tools to prevent any future rebellion, like Alalu's, from taking root, ensuring that the Earth Project served as a source of endless wealth and a model for absolute dominion. The mission was never just about gold, it was about securing tyranny and erasing any challenger to the throne. The 13,000-year doom was the climax of this internal strife, the moment when the military confrontation between the usurper and the exiled king's forces resulted in planetary scarring. The dark truth is that the Anunnaki viewed Earth as entirely expendable in their internal power struggles. The planet was a strategic resource, a gold mine, and a place to discard political problems, including their eventual manufactured slave race, us. This shift in perspective is crucial. We are not the favored creations of benevolent gods. We are the descendants of a slave race designed during a celestial civil war, constantly being monitored to prevent a genetic memory of our true origins and the memory of the lost king from resurfacing. If you believe the Anunnaki mission was fundamentally darker than simply fixing their atmosphere, tell me in the comments. What role do you think the gold played beyond atmospheric repair? Did they use it as a tool for interdimensional travel or power storage? Use the phrase "gold conspiracy" to share your theories. We have laid bare the dark truth. The Anunnaki mission was not just about gold, but about consolidating Anu's power, purging political rivals, and ultimately securing tyrannical control over a newly acquired planetary resource. This leads us directly to the foundational conflict that defines virtually all human mythology, religion, and political history. The original conflict, Enki versus Enlil, the foundation of Earth's suffering. While Alalu's rebellion ignited the initial catastrophic 13,000-year doom, the rivalry between Anu's two principal sons, Enki and Enlil, became the prolonged, grinding civil war that shaped every detail of our existence. Understanding their dynamic is paramount. Enlil, whose name means Lord of Command or Lord of the Bond, was the designated heir on Nibiru, the chief commander on Earth, responsible for the operational success of the gold extraction mission, and, crucially, maintaining the strict separation between the Anunnaki and any emerging native life. He was the authoritarian, the militarist, the disciplinarian. He saw Earth as a resource to be exploited, and humanity, once created, as mere chattel to be controlled, confined, and, if necessary, destroyed. Enki, meaning Lord of the Earth or Lord of the Swamp, was the chief scientist, the master geneticist, and the intellectual pioneer. He was responsible for the actual engineering of the Adamu, primitive man, after the Igigi rebellion. Enki was often portrayed as the more sympathetic figure, the one who sometimes offered aid and knowledge to humanity. However, this sympathy was often rooted in his professional pride over his creation and a perpetual need to undermine his half-brother, Enlil. Enki used humanity as leverage in his ongoing power struggle. This rivalry created the permanent dichotomy on Earth. Enlil represented the doctrine of total control, isolation, and suppression of knowledge. The very forces that ensured the 13 million year doom was successfully erased from memory. Enlil was the ultimate conservative, dedicated to maintaining the political status quo established by his father, Anu. He demanded obedience and fiercely punished any transgression, leading to his portrayal in many mythologies as a wrathful, uncompromising god. Enki conversely represented the subversive element. His actions, like creating humanity or later intervening to save a select few from Enlil's plans during the Great Flood, were not driven by selfless compassion, but by a strategic attempt to gain advantage over Enlil and elevate his own status within the Nibiruan hierarchy. He gave humanity limited knowledge, the knowledge of farming, architecture, and even some celestial observation, but always with the goal of creating a loyal, knowledgeable following that would challenge Enlil's authority. This fundamental split between the two brothers led to the installation of proxy rulers and conflicting ideologies among the fledgling human populations. Different cities and regions pledged allegiance to either Enlil or Enki, resulting in the ancient wars and religious schisms that characterize early Sumerian and Egyptian history. The suffering of Earth, therefore, is not a product of external cosmic forces, but the direct fallout of an internal celestial family feud. Humanity became the battlefield, a genetically pliable population molded by the contradictory commands of their gods. But here is the critical connection back to the lost Anunnaki king. Enki's frequent defiance of Enlil mirrors, in a domesticated way, the original radical defiance of Alalu against Anu. Enki, though careful not to openly depose his father or brother, often exploited the weaknesses in the regime, much like Alalu tried to do with the gold mines. This suggests that the deep historical memory of successful, albeit catastrophic, rebellion lingered. The Anunnaki knew that dissent could be lethal, which fueled Enlil's paranoia and his relentless efforts to maintain rigid control. The ongoing conflict between the two brothers ensured that Earth would never have a unified, peaceful development. Instead, it was subjected to cycles of destruction and rebuilding, with each brother fighting for his faction's supremacy, using humanity as pawns in their game of celestial succession. This dynamic continues today, manifested in the opposing forces of centralized global control versus technological freedom, an echo of the original struggle between the militaristic Enlil and the scientific boundary-pushing Enki. If this idea that human suffering is based on a millennia-old family feud between two alien entities makes sense to you, type Anunnaki feud in the comments. We are about to zoom back in on the specific actions of Alalu, whose rebellion truly started this chain of events. What modern conflicts do you think are still being orchestrated by the factions of Enki and Enlil today? We've mapped the colossal Anunnaki feud between Enki and Enlil, but to understand the deep-seated fear that drives their regime, we must return to the original source of chaos, the spark that lit the fuse. The mystery king Alalu, his audacious act of rebellion and claim to the throne. His story is the true beginning of Earth's entanglement in celestial politics, and the event that triggered the 2,000-year doom. Alalu was not just a disgruntled prince, he was the king of Nibiru before Anu. The accounts tell of a brutal coup. Anu, Alalu's cupbearer, seized the throne. Alalu, facing certain execution or imprisonment, made a desperate, calculated gamble. He realized that the political capital lay not in surviving, but in controlling the one resource Nibiru truly needed, the atmosphere-saving gold. He stole a fast ship, fled the planet, and set a course for Earth. This wasn't a retreat, it was an act of high-stakes political warfare. Imagine the sheer audacity. Alalu landed on Earth, confirming the existence of gold reserves. Specifically, he found evidence of gold dust in the atmosphere. He then sent a chilling message back to Anu. I am here. I possess the knowledge of how to save your world. If you want the gold, you must recognize my sovereignty here on Earth. He had successfully turned his exile into a leverage point, establishing the first rogue government outside of Nibiruan central control. This singular act explains the rapid, aggressive response of Anu's regime. Anu could not ignore Alalu, because Alalu held the key to Nibiru's survival. Therefore, the official expedition, led by Enki and Enlil, was primarily a military and retrieval mission designed to neutralize Alalu, reclaim the gold, and assert the new post-coup legitimacy of Anu's line. Alalu's claim to the throne was powerful because it was based on established Nibiruan law. Even though he was physically deposed, his bloodline legitimacy remained. By setting up his own kingdom on Earth, the planet he discovered and validated for its gold, he essentially forced Anu to negotiate or risk civil war across the solar system. For a time, Anu was forced into an uneasy truce, allowing Alalu to live, but only under the watchful, hostile gaze of Enki and the newly arrived Anunnaki forces. However, Alalu's defiance was not confined to politics. The ancient texts suggest that he brought with him not just knowledge of gold, but something far more dangerous, a device or technology related to Nibiru's planetary defense, or perhaps even a forbidden weapon. This artifact, which some hypothesize was related to massive energy projection or even gravitational manipulation, was his ultimate insurance policy. He was saying, "If you come for me, I will not only withhold the gold, I will deploy something that will ensure Nibiru loses this vital resource forever, potentially destroying Earth in the process." The specific location of Alalu's early power base is critical. He settled near the gold-rich Abzu and established the earliest pre-flood infrastructure. This infrastructure, built with advanced technologies before the arrival of the main Nibiruan engineers, is the key to the 13 million year doom. When the conflict inevitably escalated between Alalu and the forces of Enki and Enlil, a conflict often described in metaphorical terms of wrestling or poisoning, that ultimate weapon or technology was activated, either intentionally by Alalu or as a consequence of the ensuing Nibiruan war. The resulting cataclysm was so profound that it did more than just kill the king. It fundamentally fractured the planet's crust, shifted climatic cycles, and necessitated the massive geological reset that took millions of years to stabilize. The victorious Anunnaki regime under Enlil and Enki then spent millennia actively suppressing the physical evidence of this first destructive regime. They needed to ensure that no subsequent generation, human or Igigi, would ever learn that their gods were capable of such devastating petty warfare or that a legitimate alternative ruler had ever existed. Alalu is the ultimate spectre haunting Anunnaki rule. His rebellion serves as the constant reminder that the Nibiruan Empire is built on a lie and sustained by fear. The conspiracy is not just to control us, but to perpetually neutralize the threat of the Duhul lost Anunnaki king's return, either through his descendants or the discovery of his lost technologies. If the tale of Alalu's coup and flight to Earth resonates with you as the true origin story of conflict, type "Alalu lives" in the comments. We must now explore the specific mechanics of his exile and the dangerous technology he wielded, the ultimate act of bringing planetary war to Earth. What specific historical structure or legend do you think is a direct remnant of Alalu's brief, powerful reign? The audacious act of Alalu's rebellion set the stage, transforming Earth from an obscure gold repository into a high-stakes interstellar battleground. Now we must dissect the immediate fallout of his victory in exile. The exile and the weapon, how Alalu brought planetary war to Earth. This is not simply about politics, it's about the deployment of technology so advanced and catastrophic that it necessitates the entire 13,000 year doom cover-up. When Alalu fled Nibiru, he didn't just escape, he stole the means of planetary leverage. We know he discovered the gold on Earth, but the sheer speed and commitment of Anu's response, sending his two most powerful sons, Enki and Enlil, to reclaim the planet, indicates that Alalu possessed something far more dangerous than just knowledge of a resource. This leads to the intense speculation about the forbidden weapon. Ancient Sumerian texts, when stripped of mythological interpretation, suggest that the Anunnaki utilized highly advanced forms of energy manipulation, perhaps related to nuclear fusion or even focused gravitational waves. Given Alalu's status as a former king, he would have had access to the most protected Nibiruan military secrets. The consensus among deep lore researchers is that Alalu possessed or had the knowledge to deploy a weapon of immense, planet-altering magnitude. Some theorize this was the legendary Me device, a portable source of immense power and information. Others suggest it was a targeted delivery system capable of altering a planet's rotational axis or disrupting its core stability. Alalu's strategic brilliance was in using this weapon as a deterrent. he established his initial headquarters in the Abzu, the gold-rich region of southern Africa. When Enki first arrived, the relationship between the deposed king and the chief scientist was tense. Enki was sent to assess the gold and eventually found a way to neutralize Alalu politically, often through subterfuge and, according to some texts, a kind of ceremonial poisoning that resulted in his eventual death or deep exile. However, the consequences of this internal assassination attempt were devastating. The energy device or weapon that Alalu controlled was triggered, either in self-defense or as a final, desperate act of vengeance against the usurpers. This detonation, or perhaps a chain reaction caused by the ensuing battle between Alalu's forces and the main Nibiruan military, was the true starting point of the 13-million-year cataclysm. Imagine a focused burst of energy capable of vitrifying mountainsides or causing massive, instantaneous tectonic shifts. This event was not merely local, it was planetary. It caused a catastrophic destabilization of Earth's equilibrium, fracturing the crust and initiating geological upheavals that took millions of years to settle down. This trauma is why the Sumerian king lists suddenly register those impossible massive timelines. They are measuring the duration of planetary convalescence, the epochs required for the planet's magnetic poles to realign and for the atmospheric dust to settle after the initial cosmic warfare. The subsequent Anunnaki rule under Enlil and Enki was therefore not a smooth colonization. It was a centuries-long effort to contain the residual technological and geological chaos unleashed by Alalu's last stand. They had to bury not just the king's name, but the geological evidence of the weapon's deployment. The establishment of military posts and controlled centers across the globe, like those in Mesopotamia, was a direct response to neutralizing the threat of this kind of internal war recurring. The ultimate tragedy is that in their power struggle, the Anunnaki inadvertently created the conditions for human life as we know it, born from the chaos and repression that followed this original planetary war. The history we are taught dismisses these tales as primitive attempts to explain natural disasters. But what if those natural disasters were, in fact, the calculated, devastating consequence of an alien king refusing to relinquish his legitimate right to the throne? This hidden conflict defines the paranoia of the ruling Anunnaki faction. They know the secrets of deep planetary destruction. They know what happens when a high-level Nibiruan turns rogue. The memory of the weapon and the resultant 13,000-year doom is the constant driving fear that mandates the continued suppression of truth. If you believe Alalu's weapon was the key factor in causing the planetary reset, use the phrase "forbidden tech" in the comments. What do you think happened to this ultimate weapon after Alalu was neutralized? Is it still hidden somewhere on Earth, waiting to be found? We've established the cataclysmic effect of Alalu's forbidden tech, recognizing that his last stand resulted in a planetary trauma that necessitates a multi-million-year recovery period. This brings us back to the most glaring statistical anomaly in the record, the numerical proof of the cover-up. The missing time. Why the reign lengths in the king's list suddenly become absurdly long, the 13-million-year problem. This is the ultimate archaeological cipher, demanding a complete re-evaluation of how we measure history. When modern scholars encounter the antediluvian reigns in the Sumerian king lists, those impossibly long durations like 28,800 or 43,200 years, they attribute them to mythological exaggeration, a way to confer great antiquity and divine power upon the rulers. But if we accept the Nibiruan context, these numbers suddenly make sense. They correlate roughly to cycles of the Pisar and 3,600 years, representing the extended lifespans of the Anunnaki, who lived by a different celestial clock. The real statistical aberration, however, is not the thousands, but the hint of millions. The pervasive sense that the Anunnaki timeline stretches back far further than the commonly accepted 450,000 years for the start of the gold mission. The fact that various king list fragments contain such wildly divergent, massive numbers suggests that the scribes were struggling to reconcile actual deep Nibiruan chronology with the politically sanitized version required by the Enlil-Enki regime. The 13-million-year problem is the duration of the planet's severe instability following Alalu's defeat and the resultant deployment of the catastrophic weapon. It's not that a single Anunnaki king reigned for 13 million years. It's that the initial destructive phase of Anunnaki intervention, the time needed for the geological wounds to heal, for the atmospheric chaos to subside, and for the planet to become stable enough for the second phase of Anunnaki colonization, the one that produced humanity, lasted that long. Think of it as the planetary equivalent of a nuclear winter, but on a cosmic scale. The initial planetary war, the one Alalu triggered, caused a genuine shift in the Earth's axis, altered magnetic fields, and potentially opened massive fissures in the crust, leading to prolonged volcanism and radical climate swings. The later Anunnaki, the ones who inherited this broken world, had to wait out this period of chaos. The king lists, in their most archaic fragmented forms, may have been attempting to document this epoch of planetary doom, the time when Earth was essentially an uninhabitable ruin before the official history could begin. The sudden drop in rain lengths after the Great Flood is equally telling. Post-flood rulers are suddenly measured in human comparable centuries, then decades. This shift is intentional. It marks the moment when the Anunnaki either interbred extensively with the Adamu, or more likely, deliberately shortened the chronology to create a history where human civilization seems young and fragile, entirely reliant on its gods. The long reigns were the necessary foundation of divine authority. The short reigns were the product of a controlled, reset history where the memory of the long, destructive past was effectively buried. The millions of years are the literal weight of the suppression. They represent the depth of the secret. The fact that historians actively avoid this chronological inconsistency is not an oversight. It is a fundamental pillar of the conspiracy. If you accept the 13-million-year timeline, the entire structure of human evolution, migration, and development is thrown into question. It forces us to acknowledge that multiple intelligent civilizations may have risen and fallen during that epoch of chaos, obliterated by the ongoing instability engineered by the Anunnaki internal war. This is the ultimate evidence that the current narrative is incomplete. The missing time is the scar tissue of a celestial war. It proves that the subsequent human experiment was a desperate second attempt by the Anunnaki to establish control after their first disastrous intervention destroyed the planet's natural state. We must read the king lists not as mere chronicles of rule, but as geological and cosmic records of destruction. If you believe the impossible reigns represent geological or cosmic cycles of recovery rather than individual lifespans, type cosmic chronology in the comments. We are now heading straight into the terrifying physical evidence, the signs of the massive event that finally brought the first Anunnaki regime to its catastrophic end. What do you think the Earth looked like during that missing time of 13 million years? We have deciphered the numerical evidence, the cosmic chronology, encoded in the impossible reign lengths of the Sumerian king lists. These millions of years are not a myth. They are the record of planetary devastation following the ultimate confrontation between the usurpers and the lost Anunnaki king, Alalu. Now, we confront the terrifying physical reality, the cataclysmic doom, evidence of a global event far older than the accepted Younger Dryas. Mainstream science acknowledges cataclysm. We talk about the extinction event that wiped out the dinosaurs 66 million years ago, or the relatively recent Younger Dryas impact. a period roughly 12,000 years ago that triggered rapid cooling and mass flooding, famously cited as the possible source for the Great Flood myths. But these events, destructive as they were, are insufficient to explain the complete absence of any advanced civilization preceding the accepted Sumerian timeline, nor do they account for the geological anomalies scattered across the globe that defy comfortable dating. The 13,000-year doom was an event or series of interconnected events that must have been vastly more destructive than the Younger Dryas. It wasn't a localized flood, it was an extreme, deep-time geological reset. The evidence of this is not found in subtle ice core data, but in massive, undeniable crustal scars and anomalies that professional geologists often dismiss as unexplained or attribute to slow, uniform processes. Consider the phenomenon of crustal displacement. Theorists like Charles Hapgood proposed that the Earth's outer shell can rapidly shift over the molten interior, causing continental plates to move thousands of miles in a short period of time. Such an event, possibly triggered by the focused energy weapon Alalu deployed, would liquefy vast tracts of land, instantaneously bury entire cities and infrastructure, and relocate polar regions. The sudden, extreme geological chaos would explain why we find evidence of tropical life frozen instantly in Siberia, or why massive structures appear submerged miles off current coastlines, seemingly placed there by inexplicable forces. Furthermore, we must look at the deep-sea core samples and the sediment layers that show signs of repeated, massive global upheaval far beyond the accepted timelines. Researchers have found evidence of impact events, massive volcanic outpourings, and sudden magnetic pole shifts dating back millions of years. If the Anunnaki War, initiated by Alalu's defiance, involved the large-scale manipulation of gravitational fields or the deliberate targeting of the planet's core stability, the resulting devastation would align perfectly with these inexplicable geological scars. The key difference between the Younger Dryas and the 13 million year doom is the level of technological involvement. The Younger Dryas may have been a natural cosmic event, a comet impact, but the earlier, deeper cataclysm appears orchestrated. It was the byproduct of two highly advanced feuding celestial powers using Earth as their battleground. This required the subsequent Anunnaki regime, led by Enlil, to perform an extraordinary amount of terraforming and controlled demolition to stabilize the planet enough for the second phase of colonization and the creation of humanity. This deep-time catastrophe provides the perfect cover-up. If the planet itself was rendered unrecognizable, if the crust shifted and buried all evidence of Alalu's short but devastating rule, then the victorious Anunnaki had an easy job rewriting history. They simply started the timeline from scratch, insisting that kingship descended from heaven only after the chaos had subsided and the planet was tamed. This makes the 13 million year doom not just an event, but the engineered amnesia of the human race. We are living on a planet still bearing the wounds of this ancient war. Every unexplained geological anomaly, every submerged structure that defies conventional dating, is a remnant of Alalu's legacy and the destructive force unleashed when Anu's regime came to reclaim their gold. If you find the geological evidence of a deep-time cataclysm compelling, type doom scars in the comments. We are about to look closer at those specific physical scars left on the Earth's surface, the megalithic signatures of a planetary war fought millions of years ago. Which geological mystery do you believe is the clearest evidence of this ancient Anunnaki conflict? We've established the concept of the doom scars, recognizing that the 13,000 year doom was a planetary scale reset, likely involving crustal displacement and the deployment of advanced Anunnaki weaponry. Now let's identify the specific, undeniable physical evidence that corroborates this timeline. Geological scars. tracking the evidence of a 13-million-year-old planetary collision or shift. This evidence exists today, often hiding in plain sight, dismissed by conventional science because it cannot fit the timeline. If a civilization as advanced as the Anunnaki was violently erased and the Earth's crust shifted dramatically, we wouldn't expect to find neatly excavated ruins. We would find massive, distorted and geologically anomalous formations. Consider the phenomena of vitrified ruins. In many ancient sites across the globe, stones and building materials are found fused together, almost glass-like, suggesting exposure to extreme, localized heat far surpassing anything natural volcanism or ancient human technology could produce. While some attribute vitrification to medieval sieges, the scale and depth of some of these formations hint at the precise, devastating use of directed energy weapons, the very kind of forbidden tech Enlil may have controlled. These vitrified scars are the literal burns left by the Anunnaki internal war. More profoundly, we must look to the deepest oceanic mysteries. The discovery of potential megalithic structures far beneath the sea, too deep and too old to be explained by the generally accepted post-glacial sea level rise, points toward pre-flood, pre-cataclysmic civilization. The colossal stone lines, alleged pyramids and anomalous structures found off the coasts of Japan, Yonaguni, or near the Azores, are often dismissed because their complexity suggests a level of engineering that would place them in a time period where no humans are supposed to have existed. If the crust shifted 13 million years ago, submerging entire continental shelves, then these ruins are precisely where we would expect to find the remnants of the earliest Anunnaki cities, Enlil's capital and infrastructure. Furthermore, we turn to the evidence of massive, rapid shifts in ancient climate. Geological records show dramatic, instantaneous changes in sedimentation and flora that occurred over vast periods, suggesting not slow evolution, but sudden, systemic shock. The existence of exotic, microscopic metallic spheres, or spherules, and traces of iridium, signature materials often associated with cosmic impacts, found in layers far predating accepted catastrophes, suggests multiple highly energetic events across deep time. These are the fragments of the celestial battle, the debris from spacecraft, or the remnants of engineered detonations that led to the cosmic chronology of chaos. The key lies in acknowledging the deep, violent history of the planet. The very structure of the continents, the massive mountain chains and the oceanic trenches may not be solely the result of slow-plate tectonics, but the consequence of planetary engineering and subsequent warfare. When Enlil and Enki arrived, they may have had to re-engineer the planet, stabilizing the crust, diverting magma flows, and creating new continental lines to ensure the long-term survival of their gold mines. This act of massive terraforming would leave its own geological scars, effectively covering the traces of Enlil's destruction with the new Anunnaki infrastructure. These geological scars are the silent witnesses. They scream of a time when the Earth was not a passive environment, but an active casualty of an interstellar power struggle. The biggest lie is that geological processes are always slow. The evidence suggests that when advanced weaponry is involved, massive shifts can occur in the blink of an eye, leading to the necessary historical reset that wiped the slate clean for the next generation of Anunnaki rule and the eventual creation of Homo sapiens. If the idea that our Earth is riddled with battle scars from a 13-million-year-old war is compelling, I want you to comment with the phrase, vitrified truth. Which modern, unexplained megalithic site do you believe is the oldest remnant of Enlil's short-lived kingdom? We have tracked the vitrified truth, the physical evidence of the 13,000-year doom scattered across the planet's crust. Now we must ask the logical question. If the cataclysm was triggered by a rogue Anunnaki king, what happened to the places they built? We need to investigate. The buried city. What happened to the pre-Great Flood infrastructure of the Anunnaki? The official, sanitized history suggests that the Anunnaki established their presence in Mesopotamia, Iran, and the Abzu, southern Africa, and that these sites were either wiped out by the later well-documented Great Flood or simply abandoned. But if the timeline stretches back 13 million years, and the initial phase ended in a world-breaking cataclysm, then the infrastructure of Alalu's original regime must be buried far deeper, in places we are only now beginning to explore. Alalu and his early faction would have built settlements designed not for long-term colonization, but for quick extraction and strategic defense. Their structures would utilize materials and energy sources beyond our current understanding, likely involving anti-gravity technology for construction and energy reactors fueled by rare isotopes. When the catastrophic war broke out, the final battle between Alalu's holdouts and the advancing forces of Anu's son, Enki, this infrastructure was the primary target. The two main ways this original infrastructure was buried were rapid sedimentation and tectonic collapse. First, the planetary destabilization caused by the forbidden tech would have triggered global sediment movement on an unimaginable scale. Imagine continental sections rapidly subsiding and being covered by millions of tons of mud, rock, and water in a matter of hours or days. This explains the deep-sea anomalies and the inexplicable layers of rock covering structures that look engineered. The civilization wasn't simply abandoned, it was instantaneously fossilized. Second, the very nature of Anunnaki construction was likely its undoing. If they built massive complexes using gravity-defying technology, the widespread failure of energy grids during the war would lead to rapid structural collapse. The city wasn't just ruined, it was compressed and buried by the Earth itself as the foundational energy matrix failed. The later Anunnaki, under the stewardship of Enlil and Enki, had absolutely no interest in recovering or studying these ruins. They needed them gone. The remnants of Alalu's city, his capital, represented the physical proof of the old regime's legitimacy and the devastating capability of internal rebellion. The search for the buried city must therefore focus not on traditional archaeological digs, but on geoscanning the deep continental shelves and specific geologically anomalous sites. Think of locations like the structure near the Bermuda Triangle, which exhibits mathematically precise walls, or the colossal submerged formations in the Pacific that defy natural explanation. These sites, likely covered by subsequent glacial deposits and then submerged as the planet stabilized over millions of years, are the graveyard of the lost Anunnaki king's empire. The later Anunnaki only established their new settlements like the spaceport at Sipar or the city of Eridu after the planet had gone through its immense stabilization period. The history they bequeathed to humanity only starts after they had successfully neutralized the threat and buried the evidence of the first cataclysmic age. The Great Flood itself, which occurred much later, was simply the final layer of sediment, the final intentional water-based destruction of the second phase of Anunnaki rule, ensuring that humanity only remembered the latest, most controllable iteration of history. This realization is crucial. The greatest secret of the Anunnaki is not what they built, but what they spent millions of years hiding. We need to look beneath the crust, beneath the ocean, and beneath the veil of accepted geology to find the truth of Alalu's existence. If you believe the greatest Anunnaki city is hidden beneath the ocean floor today, type "submerged citadel" in the comments. We must now turn our attention to the one thing the Anunnaki could never fully bury, the king's bloodline and the genetic purge that followed the 13 million year doom. We have tracked the physical scars and the submerged citadels, of the lost Anunnaki king's brief, devastating reign. But hardware and infrastructure can be destroyed. Bloodlines are far harder to purge entirely. This brings us to the most intimate and disturbing aspect of the conspiracy, the great genetic rewrite, how the king's bloodline was purged or hidden. This is the secret history contained within our very DNA. The core threat posed by Enlil was his legitimacy. He was the deposed king, and any offspring he might have had, or any loyalists who carried his genetic markers, represented a direct challenge to Anu's regime, and subsequently the dominion of Enlil and Enki. The goal of the victorious Anunnaki faction was twofold. First, to establish a new, obedient slave race, Homo sapiens, and second, to systematically eliminate any trace of Enlil's influence from the surviving Anunnaki gene pool and any primitive hominids they utilized. Enki, the master geneticist, was central to this operation. While celebrated for creating the Adamu, his role was likely far more ruthless. The genetic engineering that birthed humanity was, in essence, a controlled experiment to create a species with built-in limitations. We were designed with short lifespans, limited access to higher consciousness, the tree of knowledge, and an intrinsic tendency toward subservience, all safeguards against a repeat of Enlil's ambition. But what about the indigenous or existing life forms that were present during the 13,000-year doom? There are profound gaps in the fossil record, particularly relating to the rapid disappearance of highly evolved hominids and megafauna. Some researchers hypothesize that the massive planetary trauma caused by the war, the crustal shift, the atmosphere change, was selectively utilized to wipe out populations that were either genetically unstable or, crucially, had intermingled with Enlil's loyalists. This was not just a geological reset, it was a genetic purge. The key to the suppression lies in the Anunnaki's obsession with blood purity and succession. The Mies, the divine tablets of information and power, were intrinsically linked to lineage. If Enlil's descendants survived, they would inherently carry the right to rule and potentially the code needed to reactivate his forbidden tech. Therefore, the subsequent Anunnaki regime would have pursued a comprehensive program of selective elimination, targeting any group suspected of carrying the wrong genetic marker. This explains the intensity of the post-flood control mechanisms. After the later Great Flood, a localized event compared to the 13-million-year reset, the Anunnaki focused heavily on controlling the emerging human royal lines. The famous Anunnaki interbreeding, the creation of the Nephilim and the early demigod kings, was an effort by Enki and Enlil's lines to co-opt the concept of divine rule, ensuring that any surviving divine blood was their blood and not a remnant of Enlil's lineage. Yet whispers suggest that the purge was not absolute. Just as the Sumerian king lists contain inconsistencies, the human genome itself may contain dormant, hidden sequences, the genetic memory of the deep past, the high consciousness, and the long life of the first Anunnaki regime. These are the suppressed genes that the ruling Anunnaki faction desperately tries to keep locked down through social, religious, and political means, ensuring humanity remains within its controlled, short-lived, easily manipulated evolutionary box. The pursuit of the third, lost Anunnaki king's bloodline into the modern era becomes a search for those anomalies. Individuals or groups who exhibit exceptional longevity, profound intuitive knowledge, or an inherent resistance to authoritarian control. They are the potential echoes of the king who refused to bow. If the idea of a great genetic rewrite being central to the Anunnaki conspiracy intrigues you, use the phrase DNA secret in the comments. We must now turn to the most challenging evidence, physical artifacts and sites that mainstream archaeology refuses to date because they predate the established human timeline. We have exposed the tapestry DNA secret THCs, the genetic purge designed to eliminate the threat of the lost Anunnaki king's lineage. But even a sophisticated genetic manipulation campaign cannot erase all the physical markers of a civilization that spanned millions of years. This leads us to the physical proof that shatters the conventional timeline: the forbidden knowledge, artifacts and megalithic sites that predate known human history. Archaeology, as an academic discipline, suffers from a chronological bias. If a structure or artifact is discovered, it must fit within the accepted framework, namely, that advanced civilization did not exist before Sumer or Egypt. Any finding that seriously challenges this timeline is either ignored, misinterpreted, or aggressively debunked. These anomalous sites are the unburied evidence of the 13,000 year doom. Take, for example, sites like Göbekli Tepe in modern-day Turkey. Dated to roughly 1500 years ago, it is already a massive challenge to conventional history, proving that organized, monumental architecture existed thousands of years before the supposed invention of agriculture. But Göbekli Tepe, impressive as it is, may only be the last relatively young remnant of a much older building tradition. If we push the timeline back further, searching for structures that might date from the epoch immediately following Alalu's conflict, we find even more radical anomalies. We are talking about impossible structures that bear the hallmark of Anunnaki technology: perfect precision, astronomical alignment that only makes sense from a celestial perspective, and construction that requires powers of moving and shaping stone that defy primitive tools. Think of the foundations beneath the temple complex at Cusco's in Peru, or the Cyclopean stonework found deep in the Andes that exhibits characteristics of being melted or molded rather than carved. If these were built by Alalu's short-lived regime, they would represent the highest, most advanced level of Nibiruan construction before the planetary collapse. More mysterious are the actual artifacts. Consider the discoveries of objects encased in coal or highly compressed geological layers that should be millions of years old. Metallic spheres, intricate jewelry, or even tool fragments found embedded in strata that supposedly predate human Homo sapiens by vast epochs. These OOPArts, out-of-place artifacts, are routinely dismissed as geological oddities or hoaxes, but their very existence challenges the idea of a linear, slow progression of technology. They are fragments of the forbidden tech that survived the doom scars. These artifacts are not from the later human-centric period of Anunnaki rule. They are relics of the original, purer Nibiruan civilization that existed during Alalu's time, a civilization that had not yet suffered the full genetic and technological degradation that followed the planetary war. These objects are often characterized by their superior metallurgy, their strange energy signatures, or their incomprehensible function. They are the tangible remnants of the infrastructure of the Makpo submerged citadels. The cover-up here is one of dating. By controlling the chronological narrative, the academic establishment successfully hides the deep antiquity of these sites. They enforce a timeline that ensures humanity can never conceptualize its own past, stretching back 13 million years, thereby solidifying the illusion that the later Anunnaki regime, Enlil, Enki, were the original creators, not the scavengers who built their temples upon the wreckage of a far older, destroyed civilization. The existence of this forbidden knowledge proves that a previous, high-tech, celestial-level civilization was abruptly and violently terminated. Its ruins are still here, waiting for open-minded researchers to look past the official dates and recognize the geological context of the 13 million year doom. These sites are the keys to unlocking the memory of the lost Anunnaki king. If you believe OOPArts are genuine remnants of the earliest Anunnaki civilization, I want you to comment with the phrase, "Dating lie." We must now follow the trail of Alalu's bloodline into the modern era and see how his influence survived the purge. What specific part do you find the most difficult to explain away? We have confronted the T's dating lie and the physical relics of the Shield 13,000-year doom. But the ultimate challenge to the ruling Anunnaki faction, the descendants of Enlil and Enki, was always the potential for the lost Anunnaki king's legitimate bloodline to resurface. This forces us to examine the enduring dark thread woven through human history, the modern echoes, following the bloodline of the rebellious King Alalu into modern royal families and secret societies. The great genetic rewrite was intense, but blood is notoriously difficult to purge completely. Alalu's lineage carried not only the Nibiruan right to rule, but also potentially unique genetic sequences related to the high consciousness and technological mastery of the pre-cataclysmic Anunnaki era. For the usurpers, controlling the narrative of the divine right of kings became paramount. When the Anunnaki began interbreeding with Homo sapiens after the flood, creating the semi-divine rulers known as the Nephilim and the first human kings, it was a deliberate strategy. Enki and Enlil's descendants ensured that their blood dominated the earliest royal houses of Sumer, Egypt, and beyond. This provided a controllable, semi-divine proxy government on Earth. But history is messy, and some lines of succession, especially those originating in the pre-flood period, survived and subtly carried the forbidden genes. The key to tracking Alalu's influence lies in looking for royal and aristocratic families whose origins are deliberately obscured, whose claims to legitimacy are based on ancient, unconventional lines, or who exhibit an intrinsic, almost subconscious opposition to the established global authority that originated with Enlil's militaristic faction. These groups might not openly claim Alalu, but their symbols, their hidden rituals, and their deep philosophical antagonism toward rigid control hint at a lineage dedicated to the original anti-Anu rebellion. Consider the persistent historical obsession with specific lost bloodlines, like the search for the true descendants of Christ, or obscure pharaonic lines. These narratives, often relegated to the fringe of esoteric study, might actually be veiled searches for the surviving branches of Alalu's heritage, a lineage that the ruling global powers, the true agents of the Enlil faction, have worked for millennia to discredit or neutralize. The secret societies, organizations like the Knights Templar, certain strands of Freemasonry, or the deep law occult groups, often contain initiation rites and symbols that hark back to pre-Sumerian knowledge. This knowledge, the forbidden knowledge and of the high-tech antediluvian world, could be the remnants of the wisdom possessed by Alalu's followers. These societies, acting as custodians of suppressed history, hold the keys to the original Nibiruan technology and chronology, often hidden in plain sight through allegorical texts and arcane architecture. The modern struggle between globalists pushing for complete technological and financial centralization and decentralized, often rebellious national or spiritual movements can be interpreted as the ongoing echo of the Enlil versus Enki feud, amplified by the silent threat of Alalu's lineage. If a modern figure or group could legitimately prove descent from Alalu, they could theoretically destabilize the entire pyramid of control, challenging the divine mandate of the current celestial overlords. The search for the lost king's bloodline is less about finding a specific living person and more about identifying the enduring philosophical and genetic resistance to the Anunnaki system of control. The very impulse toward freedom, intellectual curiosity, and resistance to tyranny could be the genetic memory of Alalu's defiance encoded within the human experiment. This realization transforms our understanding of modern geopolitics. The power brokers are not just competing for oil or currency, they are fighting an ancient war for genetic and historical legitimacy, ensuring that the legacy of the 30-million-year doom remains buried forever. If you believe Alalu's lineage influences modern secret societies, use the phrase "King's Shadow" in the comments. We must now explore why the ruling Anunnaki faction remains so terrified of this long-dead king and what they risk if his history is truly exposed. We have followed the King's Shadow from the depths of geological time to the hidden structures of modern power. The enduring mystery is not that the Anunnaki covered up this history, but why they invest so much energy across millions of years into maintaining the silence. We must now dissect the legacy of fear, why the ruling Anunnaki faction needs us to forget Alalu. The fear is rooted in legitimacy and precedent. The current established order on Earth, the one built upon the lineages of Enlil and Enki, the one that views humanity as a controlled, short-lived labor force, derives its ultimate authority from a successful coup, Anu's seizure of the throne on Nibiru. If humanity, or even rival Anunnaki factions, were to fully grasp the truth of the lost Anunnaki king, the entire political and spiritual foundation of the current system would crumble. First and foremost is the threat of usurpation and blood right. Alalu was the legitimate, deposed king. If his lineage could be proven, it would legally nullify the claim of Anu and his successors. The current global system, operated by the proxies of the victorious Anunnaki faction, functions on the assumption of divine right and unquestionable authority. Exposing Alalu would prove that their reign is built on violence, deceit, and the deliberate destruction of planetary infrastructure, a crime of cosmic proportions, validated by the U13,000-year doom. Secondly, there is the terrifying reminder of the forbidden tech. Alalu demonstrated that the deepest secrets of Nibiru and military technology could be turned against the ruling power. The cataclysm he initiated was a trauma the Anunnaki never intended to replicate. They live in constant fear that the blueprints, the remaining devices, or the specific coordinates of Alalu's weapon stockpile survived the purge and could be discovered by the rebellious descendants of the Igigi or by technologically advanced humans. If that power is unleashed, the subsequent genetic rewrite and planetary stabilization efforts would be wasted, risking a second, irreversible collapse. Thirdly, Alalu represents the uncontrolled timeline. The long reign numbers in the Sumerian king lists were suppressed to keep humanity focused on a short, manageable, controllable historical cycle. If humans understood that celestial intervention stretches back 13 million years, it would utterly destabilize every organized religion, every historical text, and every scientific dogma established by the ruling regime. They need us to believe we are young, fragile, and dependent on their structures of control. The memory of Alalu is the memory of a deep, high-tech past where humanity was merely a byproduct of a celestial war. The suppression of Alalu is the highest priority for the celestial overlords, because he is the ultimate symbol of rebellion. He was a king who defied his own people, seized planetary resources, and held the entire Nibiruan survival mission hostage. His story is the perfect blueprint for modern human resistance against the deep state. A rebellion that uses leverage, technological knowledge, and the challenge of legitimacy to fight absolute power. Therefore, the ongoing efforts to maintain global amnesia, the censorship of archaeological discoveries, the control of historical narratives, and the intentional distraction of the masses through economic and social turbulence are all fueled by the ancient, persistent fear of Alalu's return. They need us to forget him, because if we remember, we will realize that resistance to galactic tyranny is not only possible, but has happened before, resulting in the ultimate global reset. The silence around Alalu is the loudest, most compelling piece of evidence that the conspiracy is real, ongoing, and entirely necessary for the Anunnaki and their proxies to maintain their power. If you understand that the fear of Alalu is the driving force behind the modern conspiracy, type "Legacy of Fear" in the comments. We are now heading towards the inevitable, terrifying climax. The question of whether the cycle of doom is destined to repeat itself. Do you think the Anunnaki are more afraid of Alalu's descendants or his technology? We have established the legacy of fear that drives the Anunnaki cover-up, recognizing that the memory of the lost Anunnaki king and the forbidden tech he wielded is the ultimate threat to the current system. Now we must confront the most chilling prospect of all. The looming threat. Is the 13,000-year cycle a cosmic timer for disaster? The existence of a cosmic chronology, encoded in the deep past, suggests that events on Earth are not random, but tied to the immense orbital cycles of Nibiru. The 13-million-year figure, representing the duration of planetary instability and recovery after Alalu's war, implies a massive cycle of destruction and rebirth engineered by celestial conflict. The question is, are we living on borrowed time, approaching the next inevitable reset? If the Anunnaki intervention and the subsequent war caused a disruption so severe that it took millions of years for Earth to naturally stabilize, then we must consider what happens when the next major cosmic variable enters the equation. That variable is, of course, the return of Nibiru. The planet follows a highly elliptical orbit, bringing it into the inner solar system every 3,600 years, the SAR. While some cycles may pass with minimal effect, the close proximity of a massive celestial body can exert immense gravitational stress on Earth's already fragile reconstructed crust. The fear is not just the physical proximity of Nibiru, but the political and technological conflict it might reignite. The return of the homeworld is when the old grudges surface, when the fight for succession heats up, and when the Earth, already stabilized by tenuous Anunnaki engineering, is once again exposed to the stresses of celestial warfare. The 13-million-year doom was the result of a single power struggle. What happens if the next alignment brings multiple feuding factions? Or if the original genetic code of Alalu's lineage awakens at the moment of peak cosmic energy? We are currently observing widespread geological and magnetic anomalies that mirror the initial signs of planetary stress described in the most archaic texts. Increased earthquake activity, rapid polar wandering, and strange atmospheric phenomena could be interpreted as the early warning signs that the deep-seated trauma inflicted millions of years ago is being reactivated by external forces, possibly hastened by modern human activity. The Anunnaki engineers, principally Enki, took great pains to stabilize the planet after the first cataclysm. Are those stabilization mechanisms now failing? This is why the current deep state, the proxies of the ruling Anunnaki faction, are so fixated on deep underground facilities, seed vaults, and off-world colonization. They are anticipating the next cycle of doom, whether it is a natural cyclical disaster or another planned reset of civilization. They are planning to survive the next catastrophe, just as their ancestors survived the chaos that followed Alalu's rebellion. Their goal is to maintain the illusion of continuity while preparing for the inevitable, whether that involves mass depopulation or a rapid technological acceleration designed to control the ensuing panic. The urgent looming threat is the fusion of ancient conflict and current cosmic cycles. If the cosmic chronology is correct, the closer Nibiru comes, the more unstable the ancient scars of the planet become, and the more likely the forbidden tech Mao, the potential weapon Alalu left behind, could be unintentionally activated by gravitational forces or intentional manipulation by modern power brokers who understand the deep history. We are not just facing environmental collapse, we are facing the inevitable consequence of a 13-million-year-old intergalactic war that used Earth as its ground zero. If you believe the U13-million-year doom is a cycle due to repeat, type cosmic timer in the comments. We have examined the history, the science, and the political fear. Now for the final, most pressing question. What proof is hiding in plain sight that you, the viewer, are already living under the influence of this long-dead king? We stand at the precipice of understanding, having traced the cosmic timer and the terrifying cycle of planetary resets. We've established that the lost Anunnaki king Enlil was erased from history, his reign resulting in the 113,000-year doom. But the erasure was never complete. His influence, his legacy, and his resistance are still palpable. This leads us to the final chilling question. The final question, cliffhanger, the proof hidden in plain sight that you are living under the shadow of a long-dead king. The proof is not a hidden tablet or a secret vault. It is the fundamental instability and contradiction that defines human civilization. Look at the structure of power today. Why do we cling so fiercely to hierarchies, monarchies, and the concept of an elite bloodline that rules by divine or inherited right? This obsession is not a natural human evolution. It is the enduring cultural and psychological programming imposed by the Anunnaki usurpers, Enlil's faction, who needed to solidify their fraudulent claim to authority after they deposed Enlil. The very framework of control, the idea that a select few are born to rule the rest, is the shadow of the victor's lie. But the real proof of Enlil's enduring shadow lies in the pervasive human trait of rebellion. Despite the great genetic rewrite, designed to create a docile slave race, humanity possesses an inexplicable, often self-destructive impulse toward questioning authority, seeking forbidden knowledge, and striving for high technological advancement. This defiant spirit, the urge to grasp the knowledge of good and evil that Enki subtly provided, is the genetic echo of Enlil's own rebellion against Anu. The drive for sovereignty, the constant fight against centralized global control, is the whisper of the lost king in our manipulated DNA. Every time humanity faces a major leap in understanding or challenges the chronological boundaries of history, whether through the discovery of parts or the re-evaluation of cosmic cycles, it is the faint genetic memory of Enlil's high-tech, pre-cataclysmic world attempting to surface. The current ruling elite, the proxies of the Anunnaki, spend immense resources fighting this inherent drive because they recognize it as the latent threat of their deposed predecessor. The shadow of the king, a grisot, also manifests in our deepest spiritual narratives. The concept of the original paradise lost, the Garden of Eden, is often misinterpreted. It is not about innocence. It is about the loss of a high-tech integrated civilization, Enlil's regime, due to a catastrophic conflict, the doom. The original sin is not eating an apple. It is gaining the knowledge of our true creators and realizing our potential for rebellion, a knowledge gifted by the defiant strain of the Anunnaki, Enki's side, often influenced by the chaos of Enlil's lineage. The final compelling proof is the cyclical nature of destruction itself. Every time humanity approaches a technological peak, moments when we near the rediscovery of clean energy, anti-gravity, or advanced genetics, a global catastrophe, be it war, engineered pandemic, or economic collapse, violently resets the timeline. This is the celestial overlords stepping in, ensuring that humanity never reaches the technological capacity that Enlil once wielded against them. The repeated resets are the constant visible proof that the fear of the long-dead king remains the primary operational directive of the true powers that govern Earth. You are living in the perpetual aftermath of a celestial coup, A history defined by deliberate amnesia and genetic suppression. The moment you question the timeline, the moment you feel the impulse to defy the rigid hierarchies, you are feeling the shadow of the Shai's lost Anunnaki king, stirring within your very being. This knowledge changes everything. It changes how you view history, how you approach power, and how you understand the constant conflicts tearing our world apart. This is not just a theory. It is the deepest secret encoded in our planet's scars and our species' rebellious spirit. If you are ready to fully accept that we live under the shadow of Alalu's legacy, type Shadow King in the comments. But before you go, you need to hear the final call to action. If you made it this far, if you stayed through 13 million years of forgotten history, the cosmic chronology, the genetic purges, and the chilling truth of the Shadow King, Alalu, then you are one of the few who is ready to handle the full scope of the celestial conspiracy. This is exactly why you need to join our community. Hit that subscribe button right now and turn on the notification bell. We dive into these deep, suppressed truths every week, and you won't want to miss our next investigation, where we expose the artifacts that prove the Anunnaki are still here, monitoring us. If this video revealed a part of history you never considered possible, please show your support by smashing the like button. That engagement is how we bypass the censorship algorithms and ensure this forbidden knowledge reaches the world. And here is your final mission. I want everyone who reached the end of this journey to comment below using only the phrase, "The shadow endures." This is our signal. Now, the rabbit hole goes deeper. Click on the video appearing on your screen right now to explore the direct descendants of Enlil and Enki and their terrifying plans for the future of Earth. Thank you for watching, and keep questioning everything.